Hello and welcome to this first lecture of the new section, Considering Repeated Game. A very interesting section as you will find, a little longish, but very useful from practical application point of view. So let's look at this lecture in this course, Mastering Game Theory. So in this section, we will give you an in-depth view of considering repeated games, right? And what we will do in this lecture is we will give you a quick overview and some in-depth details of how to analyze strategies in games that are played multiple times and where you can consider the impact of past actions on future decisions and outcomes. Isn't that real life? Right. So, how to analyze strategies in game that are played multiple times? You see here, there's a game, the cooperate and defect game, in which is a repetition one, repetition two, and same game is played again and again till either a finite time or an infinite time. So, how would you analyze strategies in games that are played multiple times? Any thoughts? So, to analyze strategies in games that are played repeatedly, it's played multiple times, and the past action can influence future directions, decisions, and outcomes. You need to take the few steps that we will outline here now. First thing you need to do is to define the game stage game. What is the basic game that will be repeated? So, identify the basic game that will be repeated. Determine the players, their possible strategies, and the payoff for each strategy combination in a single round stage game. So you define the stage game, and that should be easy because we have now looked at earlier in terms of how to identify players, their possible strategies, and payoff. So it's a thing that you have already learned. Then you need to determine the type of repetition. Is it going to be a game that is played for a known finite number of times, or is the game is going to be played indefinitely or for an unknown number of times? So define as the repetition type as finite and infinite games. Then you construct the payoff function, calculate the total payoff for each player over multiple rounds. And that's where some of the techniques, as we will talk to you later, will come in handy. And for finite rounds, you sum up the payoff of all the rounds. For infinite rounds, use the discounted sum of payoff to account for future rounds being less valuable than immediate ones, especially the things that you do a few months later. Now, if it is few days, then you maybe not need not discount it, but definitely if it is matter of months, discounting will start coming in. So these are the first three steps that you need to take. Then you need to identify the potential strategies. Now, what are the potential strategies over the repetition? You will have an action for each game, each stage game, but how would you play the repetitions? That's where the potential strategies come in. So one of the strategies that you see for such a potential strategy is what is called a grim trigger strategy. Now, in that, as you go across the repetitions, you cooperate till the opponent defects and then you defect forever. And we will illustrate as we go forward what exactly does it mean as we go forward in this lecture. Second is a tit for tat strategy. You start by cooperating and then mimic the opponent's last move. Whatever he or she has done, you keep doing that. Third is always cooperate or always defect. You play the same move in all rounds. Either you cooperate all the time or you keep defecting all the time. And then there are randomized strategies mixed between cooperation and defections based on probabilities. There are more, but let's say at this point of time, these are the four core strategies that you have. Now let us look at each of these in a little more detail to illustrate what exactly happens in each of these repetitions using these strategies. So there, before we do that, let's understand what is meant by cooperation or defection, right? We have used this word and will continue to use this word very frequently, regularly for that matter. So what do we mean by cooperate and defection? Let's define that. So in the context of repeated games, particularly analysis of strategies like grim trigger, tit for tat, always cooperate, always defect, and randomized strategies, the term cooperation and defect typically refer to the actions player take in a stage game. Example, a prisoner's dilemma or anything else. Now, what are these terms mean in various potential strategies? Let's take a look at that. Now, cooperation basically means choosing an action. So it's a choosing an action that benefits both the players in the long run, right? So long run is under consideration. You are doing something that benefits both the player, and that leads to, higher collective payoff. So it's a win-win situation, right? Now, for example, in the prisoner's dilemma, cooperation might mean both players choosing not to betray each other, resulting in moderate mutual beneficiary outcome. So that's what a cooperation means. Now, a defection basically means choosing an action that benefits individual at the expense of other player, right? So you are being selfish here, so as to say, and it's a win-lose situation. And in prisoner's dilemma, defection would involve betraying the other player, leading to higher immediate player for you as a defector, worse outcome if both defect, right? So that's what we mean by cooperation and defection, right? Then let's look at the grim trigger strategy. What does a grim trigger strategy really mean? So grim trigger in the strategy, I have laid out for you uh, 5 moves between you and your opponent, right? You always initially choose cooperate as an action that benefits both of you, so you cooperate. Now, if you cooperate, the opponent has two choices: either cooperate and defend. If opponent cooperates, you cooperate because your strategy is to cooperate till the time the opponent cooperates, right? And but if the opponent defects, then you defect. So that's your third column move. So you cooperate when the opponent cooperates, you defect when you opponent defects. Now opponents have again defect and cooperate choices. Now at this point of time, if opponent defects, you defect. And if opponent cooperates, you continue to cooperate. So it's to cooperate till the opponent continues to cooperate, otherwise defect. Now, you have defected because opponent defected in the first round. You have also defected in line with your strategy. Now, opponent can do two things: either cooperate or defect. Now, if opponent cooperates, you still defect. And that's what is meant by cooperate till opponent cooperates. And once he or she starts defecting, you defect forever. So it's a very harsh punishment for defection for the opponent. So you continue to defect, right? So that's a grim trigger strategy. And the rationale is that the threat of eternal defection will ensure that both players stick to cooperation to avoid the worst outcomes. So, and more you announce your strategy, more your opponent is likely to first to see you whether you actually do it and then come in line, fall in line, so as to say. So that is grim trigger strategy. The second one is a tit for tat strategy in which again the 5 moves you start by cooperating, and if you cooperate, if your opponent cooperates, you cooperate because tit for tat. You will copy your opponent's move. If he or she defects, you will defect. Now in the next round of opponent, if he or she defects, you will defect. If he cooperates, you will cooperate, right? So you're copying again. Now, if you have defected in the third column and opponent cooperates, you will start cooperating, versus grim trigger will continue to defect forever. So here you kind of reciprocate to the opponent. So and do what he or she does. Now the rationale in this is to encourage mutual cooperation and punishment defection immediately, but not permanently. So it's less harsh move in case of a defection by the opponent. The third one is always cooperate, in which you always choose to cooperate action regardless of opponent's move, and you never defect, and it maintains trust, but it can be exploited by opponents who defect. And in this you will see it's a simple strategy. You cooperate, opponent cooperates or defect, you continue to cooperate, opponent defects or cooperates, and you continue to cooperate. So you always cooperate. The fourth strategy is always defect, opposite of always cooperate, where you never cooperate, always choose a defection action, and basically it maximizes short-term gains but leads to a poor collective outcomes. It's a lose-lose situation continuously. So you defect starting, Opponent cooperates and defects, you defect again, both the cases. Opponents either cooperates and you continue to defect. So it's defect always. The last strategy that we'll talk here is randomized strategy. Now in this, you cooperate with a certain probability, 50% of the time say, and you decide. And you defect again by, again, a complementary probability, 1 minus the probability of cooperating. And this introduces unpredictability, making it harder for opponent to exploit a fixed pattern. The probabilities can be adjusted based on opponent's behavior. So if you choose a 50-50, you will start, say you start with defecting, your opponent cooperates, you cooperate first time. Now when the next time he cooperates, you defect because that's your 50-50. Now if you are defect, if your opponents defect, you cooperate, and the opponent cooperates, you defect again. So it's a randomized thing. There's no fixed pattern other than the probabilities that you know. So that is randomized strategy. So we have now looked at 4 stages, starting with defining the stage to finding the strategies that we talked about just now. So next steps are to analyze the equilibria, to find the solutions in repeated games. So you determine here if cooperation and defection can be sustained as an equilibrium strategy using concepts like Nash equilibrium and SPE, sub-game perfect equilibrium, in which you ensure that the strategy is in equilibrium at every sub-game in a repeated game. Then also you can use a Folk theorem. In infinitely repeated games, Folk theorem states that any feasible payoff that is better than min-max payoff, the worst case scenario, can be sustained as an equilibrium. And don't worry about this, we have a lot of lectures that we will take you through each of these in a lot more detail as we go forward. So just be mindful of the kind of options that you have. And then you consider history dependent strategy, evaluate how past action influenced current decisions, and use history of play to determine future strategies. Like if a player defects, other players may defect in future rounds also. So these are the next 3 steps that we need to take. So what do we do next? So we will now get into details of these 3 steps, starting with analyzing the equilibria in the next lecture. So thank you so much for watching this first lecture on considering repeated games. I hope you continue to learn, continue to enjoy, and I do look forward to see you again in the next lecture. Please feel free to message me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer your question, and also download the PDF files to take a look at those strategies and understand them fully.